Let's have a look at Geneseo University in Geneseo, New York. So I was just sitting already for a couple hours and I just felt like standing, but wanted to get this video done. This Airbnb doesn't have a standing desk, so we just got a little box here. So just go ahead and ignore the fact that there's just a box right here. Just like we're supposed to ignore the fact that all this old world architecture actually existed on this continent and a lot of it still does. Today we're talking about Geneseo, I believe that's how you say it. Here's a look at where we're at. We're in the state of New York. Here, I'll zoom it out a little bit. So we're right here kind of in upstate western New York. Not sure exactly how you define that in New York, but a little bit east of Buffalo right here. SUNY Geneseo is State University of New York, and that college, that university, is some of the main buildings that we're going to be looking at, but we'll also look at a few other ones. And I actually didn't plan to come here. I was just driving through on my way to Palmyra, which is what the next video in this series is about, another city in New York, upstate New York. But I noticed some insane architecture happening when I drove through this little town, so I had to jump out, take a look, see what's up. Near Geneseo was the largest Seneca village, Geneseo, Seneca being a group of indigenous Iroquois-speaking people, which was a center of power for the Iroquois Confederacy. It was also the Confederacy's breadbasket with orchards, vineyards, and fields of maize and vegetables. And I did touch on this in an earlier video, but it seems that in a lot of these cases, these bow and arrow teepee Indian people that we've been shown in the media were actually oftentimes very well off, had commerce happening, homes, everything. Like the full deal, were very prosperous people. And it's for that reason that you'd want to conquer them and take over their stuff, because they actually had some legit things happening. War starts to happen between the white man, and the white man's battling over territory, and some of that territory belongs to some of these Indian tribes and confederacies that are actually much more well off than you would think, and they get caught up in the warring white men thing. And so what happens is, like right here we see, for example, the Seneca joined the British and the Tories against the colonists who were fighting for independence. So there's the white man that wants to become independent on this land, and then there's the British white man that wants control, and then there's the Indian territories that are already here, and they're getting mixed up in this, making deals with one or both sides of these white man things over wars and properties. Eventually, as the story goes, over and over and over again in each of these locations, whether it's here upstate in New York Indian Territory, or down in the South Indian Territory, or over in the West Indian Territory, they get driven out. But interestingly, always predating each of these times that they're forced out of a place, there are pacts or treaties made between the white man government and the leaders of some of these tribes. So you could say, it looks like, I don't know, I'm not saying this is absolutely the case. I would have to do a lot more research here, a lot more to really get down to the bottom of each one of these. But to me, and looking at how these territories still exist today and the money they receive from government, it looks to me like there were just simply agreements made between leaders from both sides that this is how this is going to go down, and this is what you get, and this is where you go, and just higher up leadership making deals and over who gets what land. Eventually, the Seneca, this Iroquois tribe, is forced to flee to the British-held Fort Niagara. And oh boy, did things start to get a little bit interesting right here. But real quick, before we do that, here's a look at the Iroquois territory before it was before the wars happened and the treaties and they had to flee and they left and all that stuff went down. This is how much their territory covered. That's a really big territory. That's several states. I don't know, 10 states, maybe something like that. Here's a look at the chief of the Seneca. He lived almost 100 years, from 1740 to 1836, and that's a very well-dressed, great ornamentation and design in the jewelry and the clothing and whatever this, maybe a piece of technology or something, maybe it's a smoking pipe, I don't know, but this is more well off than living in a teepee. And now here's an area where I have a ton more to learn about. I just, we're barely scraping the surface here with this one, but I thought I'd just share a couple of things about Fort Niagara and about these ancient forts in general. Pretty impressive. Fort Niagara is a fortification originally built to protect the interest of New France in North America. It is located near Youngstown, New York, on the eastern bank of the Niagara River. And in 1678, so this one's going back quite a ways. Really, we've touched pretty much 1800s, maybe a tiny bit. I've touched on stuff in the 1700s in any of my earlier videos, but we're going back into the 1600s now. So here's where we're at, up here in New York, right by Niagara Falls. Right here on the edge of Lake Ontario is Old Fort Niagara. We'll come back to this in just a second. Actually, I'm going to spin this. And if you notice right here, there's a little bit of a unique shape happening, or unique shapes in kind of various ways. So I'll show you what I think is going on. Now, like I said, I don't know a ton about these. I've got a lot more to look into. I'll just scrape the surface in this video, come back again to the topic later on. But this right here is called a star fort. This one exists in the Netherlands, but you can clearly see that this is a design of land and water and walls and buildings, technologies you could definitely say, to build a fort, a fortress. And exactly why they're designed this way, what they accomplished by being designed this way, that's the stuff we're going to have to come back to in a later video. But that is what I believe is what we're looking at with Fort Niagara. If we come back here to the map, now we definitely don't see anything as clear as, the star formations that we just saw, but I think we can definitely see some remainders to just show us what this once was. Here's another look at a map of Fort Niagara, and so you can see, especially right here, this part, I think we're just not seeing the other piece of however it was shaped over here, and maybe all the other pieces that sat on the outside of what we're seeing right here. But clearly in this section right here, that's a design of a star fort. Here's another look at one. This one's out in France. And look at the size of these walls. Here's another look at a remnant of one in Georgia. This one's called Fort James Jackson, I believe. Here's another look at it from the outside. They're also called bastion forts. So here's a look at a bastion fort from 1593. And what you see here is the whole, so it's got obviously the really unique shape. And if you zoom in, this is a full city in here, with other big massive buildings, churches, everything, people, commerce. Here's a look at another one. This one's out in Spain. This is a really interesting one in the Netherlands. Here's another super old one. 1458 is the date that they're given on this one. And it's very pixelated when I zoom in, but the same thing going on there. It's a fort to protect the city. Here's another look at one in 1597. And what do you know, Lady Liberty sits right on top of one. Now here's a couple images of Fort Niagara. This one's looking at it from the outside, or at least how it currently stands. There's not a lot of old pictures of it. I imagine there's a lot more built up and everything, but we're just looking at remains. Thought this was a pretty good look at the wall, the solid, super heavy stone. This is one of the main buildings still standing there. And they say right here this is the main entrance, although this thing's so old and is clearly just remnants of however this was actually built up at one point. So maybe or maybe not this is the main entrance, I don't really know, but thought it was cool to take a look at all the rock, and then also the crown and shield right here. That is where the Iroquois people fled to the Fort Niagara Star Fort that was supposedly put up in the 1600s. one of the most remarkably preserved villages in northwestern New York. It's one of the best examples of picturesque architecture and town planning as expounded by American landscape architect in his enormously popular and influential books. So I'm saying the real architect of this place existed probably quite a while before 1815. The cohesive quality of the surviving town displays a textbook of styles and is almost unique in American architectural history. The Valley of Geneseo is wide and fertile with some of the best agricultural land in New York, but it was prone to flooding, and Geneseo suffered several bad floods until the Army Corps of Engineers construction of a dam upstream the community in the 1950s. And again here, as usual, we see proof of flooding having happened in this area, and then also the Gov coming in and setting up new water control. And real quick, before I show you the footage that I got of Geneseo, I also searched the county that it's in, and I found this. The Water Therapy, Avon Springs, and the Jackson Sanitarium. And then I looked at this picture, which is a view from the sanatorium and from the 1890s, and I noticed this is where they're having the view from. And so I imagine this is probably a pretty impressive building to check out from the 1800s. I'm not going to say I was right. I'll let you tell me whether or not you think it's an impressive building for back then. Here's another look at it. And it seems to be a common theme across all America that in the early 1900s, 1800s, there were castles thrown up for mentally ill people, like the one we also see out in Utah, and then we see this one here in New York. So now we take a look at the university, the State University of New York College at Geneseo, and it was founded in 1867 as the Geneseo Normal School before it became a liberal arts college in 1948. So let's have a look at the normal school. So here's a look at the State Normal School. Just one big, massive, solid brick building with some really interesting, I'm not sure it's not quite a dome. It's kind of like I don't know if I've seen quite that structured dome type of thing before, but pretty cool. And yeah, just a really intense building right here. I also saw this on the way, which I still need to look into what those three red things up top. I don't know I don't know much about those at all, but I've seen those around on a lot of this old architecture. And just the castle towers out front right here that they've, like this up here, the little white siding box top they threw on top of the tower. Anyways, I thought this was funny. I guess this is a golf course country club now. This again looks to me like, really looks to me like leftover of a castle with several towers still intact. Like this up here, I thought this was so funny up here. Like that, no. Like this thing wasn't built to have this on top of it. And here's a look at it. This would be this is striking, right? I would really hard not to notice this. And I think it, as I say with a lot of these, especially this middle tower part right here, there had to be something else sitting on top of here, like really finishing that off. I think it's just been very much stripped down, but a very impressive building right here. And if you haven't watched the videos leading up to this one, I recommend that you go back and watch them in order, because I touched on this in another video, but we'll also see right here next to this amazing rock building. Yep, here's the cabin. Here's the cabin that they lived in while they built all these amazing buildings. And it's interesting, you can go to so many of these little historical spots with amazing architecture, but they like to plop down a little log cabin so you know what the story is and was. Log cabin, wood people, poor were here. There was not an advanced, prosperous civilization ever previously here on this continent that's being hidden from you. They went from these very poor dirt road log cabins, not even went from it while they were in those. That's why they built these amazing schools of insanely heavy rock and churches with glass stained, like super tall stained glass windows. And they also decided to bury all these buildings several stories into the earth. Tiny log cabin, castle. Tiny log cabin, castle. tiny log cabin. That window right there, it's just the building's been flooded up to that point, and we threw down something right here. I don't know, was that metal or cement or whatever, and just turned it into a bike rack. Because the designers of this building would not put a window right there and design a bike rack right in it's just, come on. So much brick. So much weight to move. Oh yeah, and this tripped me out for a second. Like this font right here just screamed like I don't match the building. I think maybe they tried to pick a font that they thought would match it, but that doesn't match the building or the architecture to me, in my opinion. Maybe my design eye is terrible, I don't know. Ah yes, and right here on top of this planter box, we needed a nice archway and doors that don't open actually to the planter box, but they'd be there if we ever did need that. Yo, look at that there. So here's a look at another building now with some just amazing statues carved out over the doorway. And look at all the intricacy on these flowers. We're gonna live in the log cabins, but we're gonna build gnarly statues, gnarly buildings, very intricate designed, all of it. It's all gonna be made out of super heavy rock. And also while we're at it, let's throw some foreign language in there. Why not? Because it's a normal school. Bro, that is so cool. What is that? Yo, there's a dude. There's a dude right there. There's a dude in there. Bent over at a little stone desk reading a book. Dang, look up here. Okay, look up here at this brick. Like, look at this. You've got most of the bricks running horizontal, but then you got these diagonal ones, like, running into each other. It's so cool. And I bet this middle section right here, again, there was probably something in there. A statue, gold statue, I don't know, something. And then I thought the side of this building was interesting. It looked like maybe been under some burn damage, but then also you could clearly see like the slope of the mud that we then just came and paved on top of. The mud that buried so much of this building right here. And I don't know about this one right here. I know sometimes, like I don't know if, probably not original. I know sometimes we created doorways and then so we could lift stuff into the levels above. So like you'd roll up here with a tractor or crane or something, and that would be an easy way to lift it up and get it into that spot. So maybe that's what that is. Oh yeah, and then this right here, like what is this in the middle? What are you covering up there? What was there? What did you strip off? What did you cover up? I don't know, but like obviously this was something. And then there's this really unique, I didn't know quite what to make of this. It's like my first time seeing this kind of material up here. I'm not quite sure what it was. And then here was a really interesting design I noticed. So you notice in those little squares, there's more smaller squares. That design, don't know how to explain it. But then also over here in the corner, you see that there's a black piece of the wall with the same design. And then if we pan over here to the other side, there's also a black wall, but without the design. And then you can see on this building, that same design is running all the way up. And then, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this, I'll show you in the wiki page right here. The bear fountain that sits in Geneseo's Main Street. And it's got that unique green color on it that I've mentioned a couple times in my videos, that hopefully at some point I learn a little bit more about what that color is. And because there's a lot of these sitting around across the whole country. I don't know about necessarily the bear, but just different types of old structures, statues, animals in this type of color. And then off to the right here, got a picture of it out of my car. Just another massive church brick rock building with a lot of old ornamentation on it still. Very cool. It's even got a bell still sitting in there. Even the towers, the spires, it's all rock. And so they say that there was the original structure, original courthouse in 1822, and then they built a new front section in 1898. Supposedly this front one here is the new one, the one that's got the gold dome on top, and then the one that sits back behind here is the older one. And then across the street right here, you've got another huge church with a big stone monument with a pyramid sitting at the top of it. And I think it's become easy for us to underappreciate what it means to actually build a building, a full building out of brick. I mean, because oftentimes a lot of the brick buildings we see were built in much earlier time periods, and so they look older and more roughed up and not brand new and shiny. And so we look at it as like, oh, not, but no, that's the proof that it is actually a very solid, like the type of structure you would want to build because it has withstood time. You don't see our lumber homes from hundreds or 200 years ago sitting around. You just don't. But these rock buildings, they can sit there for a super long time. And that's why when you go to a lot of these old historic districts with earlier time periods, oftentimes they're rock, because rock can survive from longer time periods, lumber can't, and also because people were much better builders back then, and they used rock, and they knew how to move rock around and build with it and carve it, and had the economy, and whether it was really big animals to move that way or better technologies to move that way. I didn't know this was along the way at all, but there was this little memorial to a torture tree and burial mound. So this principal village of the Seneca was destroyed in 79 and was the farthest point reached by, this army. The campaign laid waste in the Indian land and so broke the offensive powers of the British-Tory Indian alliance against New York and Pennsylvania, extended the boundaries of the United States, revealed the fertile country of the Geneseo, and resulted in its early pioneer settlement. So takeover, and this tree's been sitting here since that time period. So a pretty old tree here, couple hundred years or so old, and that's pretty rare, which is a very interesting thing to think about. I encourage all of you to think about, why is it so rare for a tree to be just a couple hundred years old across pretty much all of America? You can find a pocket here or there, or a tree here and there that's older, but for the most part, most of the trees across the entire country are babies, nowhere near a couple hundred years old. But there are pockets, like in California, the sequoias in California, that's a pocket of trees that's thousands. So we should see old trees across the entire country, but there aren't. What happened to them? And also here on this tree is where these two guys, Boyd Parker, were tied up and tortured by the Seneca people for what they were doing to their land.